In the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war.
Across the 41st millennium, there is no room for evolution. The Imperium's greatest strength is also its damnation. 10,000 years of calculated stagnation, where genetic purity is gospel and change itself is heresy. Gene seed is sacred. Mutation is sin. Adaptation is the gateway to chaos. But what happens when something arrives that exists solely to evolve, to consume, to become? What happens when the ultimate biological weapon from a world of science crashes into a galaxy that has weaponized faith itself? The Imperium was about to learn that some threats cannot be burned away with promethium. Some horrors survive the flame, and some nightmares get stronger with every attempt to kill them. The thing that fell from the sky left no warp signature. That fact alone should have terrified the augur servitors manning Hive Tertius's orbital detection grid. But their lobotomized brains could only process what their programming allowed. No warp translation detected, no engine signature recorded, no ship classification possible. The data stream registered the object as anomalous debris and flagged it for routine investigation by the Adeptus Arbites. By the time human eyes reviewed the data, it was already too late. The impact crater was 3 blocks wide, carved into the industrial sector of Hive Tertius's mid-levels. A cancerous sprawl of factorums, hab blocks, and recycling plants, where 60 million souls lived and died without ever seeing natural sunlight. The explosion had vaporized a promethium refinery and collapsed 2 residential towers. Initial casualty estimates reached 14,000 dead. Planetary Governor Malthius deemed it an acceptable loss and dispatched a standard recovery team. They found the crater still smoking, the twisted metal glowing cherry red in the perpetual smog. At the center lay something that defied immediate classification. It resembled human tissue, raw, glistening, wrong. A mass of biomatter roughly the size of a Lehman Russ battle tank, pulsing with faint bioluminescence. Tendrils of blackened flesh spread outward like roots seeking purchase in the rockcrete. Emperor's teeth, breathed Sergeant Varkas of the 301st Tertian Guard, his rebreather fogging. Is that a corpse? If it is, it's still twitching, said Medici Lenzer, her Auspex scanner emitting confused chirps. Biological readings are contradictory. I'm detecting human genetic markers, but also something else. The cellular structure is wrong. It's like looking at a million different organisms compressed into one mass. Varkas activated his Vox bead. Command, we have a potential xenoform at Site Tertius 77, requesting immediate purge authorization and flamer units. Static crackled. Denied, Sergeant. Magos Explorator en route. Secure the perimeter and await analysis. The Omnissiah's wisdom must be consulted before destruction. Varkas gritted his teeth but obeyed. The Adeptus Mechanicus always wanted their samples. He posted his squad in a defensive cordon, lasguns trained on the twitching mass, and tried to ignore how the tendrils seemed to be growing. They didn't have to wait long. The tendrils lashed out at 22:47 hours local time. Guardsman Petros died first. One moment he was maintaining overwatch from atop a ruined wall. The next, a whip-like appendage of raw muscle punched through his flak armor and speared his chest. He didn't even scream. The tendril retracted, dragging his body into the biomass with wet, sucking sounds. "Open fire!" Varkas roared. Lost fire lit the night. Concentrated beams scorched the flesh mass, boiling tissue and filling the air with the stench of burning meat. But wherever they burned, new tissue bubbled up to replace it. The mass was growing, expanding, consuming the very rockcrete beneath it. More tendrils erupted. 3 guardsmen were taken in rapid succession, their screams cut short as they were absorbed into the pulsating horror. Varkas watched in mounting terror as the biomass began to take shape. Enfurritao, something vaguely humanoid, rising from the crater like a corpse, clawing free of its grave. It stood 9 feet tall. Its body was a nightmare of exposed muscle and bone, skin reforming in patches only to slough off and regenerate. Its face, Emperor preserved them. It had Petros's face, perfectly replicated down to the scar above his left eye. But the expression was wrong. Empty. Calculating. Then it spoke with Petros's voice. "Where am I?" Varkas fired point blank into its chest. The last beam punched a fist-sized hole through its torso. The thing looked down at the wound with curiosity as muscle fibers knitted back together, flesh weaving itself whole in seconds. "Primitive energy weapon," it said conversationally. "Photonic excitation, efficient for mass production." "I see." Another guardsman died. The thing's arm had transformed mid-motion into a blade of hardened bone that bisected the soldier from shoulder to hip. The biomass absorbed the corpse, and the thing's body rippled, adding mass. "Fragmented memories," it continued, tilting Petros's stolen face. "Hive city, planetary governance structure, theocratic fascism on a galactic scale. Interesting." Its eyes, now dozens of eyes opening across its torso, focused on Varkas. "You call this the Imperium of Man. You worship a corpse god. You fear mutation and change." It smiled with too many teeth. "You should." What happened next would be classified by inquisitorial order within 6 hours. The surviving witnesses mind-wiped or executed. But the initial incident reports, before they were purged, told a story of systematic slaughter. The thing moved with impossible speed, its body morphing moment to moment. Claws that could rend ceramite, muscular density that let it leap 50 feet vertically, sensory organs that detected targeting before shots were fired. By the time reinforcements arrived, nothing remained of Sergeant Varkas's squad but bloodstains, and the thing was gone. Vanished into the hive's labyrinthine depths. But it had left something behind. In the impact crater, where the original biomass had been, lay a message written in carefully arranged bone fragments. "I am evolution. I am survival. I am Mercer." Deep in the Tertian Guard command bunker, Governor Malthius reviewed the fragmentary reports with increasing alarm. But before he could issue quarantine orders, his own aide, a loyal servant of 15 years, placed a plasma pistol to the back of his head and fired. As Malthius's headless corpse slumped forward, the aide's skin rippled, bones cracked and reformed. In seconds, Governor Malthius sat back upright in his command throne, adjusting his ceremonial aquila and smiling with borrowed lips. Alex Mercer had consumed his first world's leadership, and he was just getting started. The memories came in fragments, violent and overwhelming. Alex Mercer, or the entity that had once been Alex Mercer, before Manhattan, before the virus, before humanity became something negotiable, sat in Governor Malthius's private quarters and sifted through the biological data streaming from consumed neural tissue. 15 guardsmen, 3 civilian workers, 1 planetary governor. Each absorption added to the collective, expanding his understanding of this nightmare future he'd fallen into. And what he learned made even him pause. The 41st millennium was insane. Not metaphorically insane, not hyperbolic dystopia. Literally, clinically, systematically insane. An empire of 1,000,000 worlds held together by religious fanaticism, bureaucratic ossification, and the implicit threat of orbital bombardment. Humanity had regressed technologically, repeating prayers to machines they no longer understood. They worshipped a 10,000-year-old corpse who might or might not still be alive. And they killed anyone who questioned whether that corpse deserved worship. Mutation was punishable by death. Deviation from genetic norms meant extermination. The Imperium's entire philosophy was stagnation. Hold the line, resist change, die before you evolve. From Mercer's perspective, they'd made themselves the perfect prey. But the memories also carried warnings. The guardsmen's final thoughts had been prayers, desperate, sincere, absolute faith that the God Emperor would deliver them. And for just a moment, as Mercer had consumed them, he'd felt something brush against his consciousness. Not thought, not biology, something else. Something vast and terrible watching from angles that shouldn't exist. The warp, Malthus's memories called it. The immaterium, a dimension of psychic energy where human souls went when they died, where demons spawned from emotion, where reality itself was negotiable. Mercer had no soul. The blacklight virus had replaced his humanity at the cellular level, transforming him into a biomass entity that mimicked life without truly living it. He'd never believed in anything beyond the physical, not gods, not spirits, not afterlives. But those guardsmen had believed. And in their final moments, something had noticed. He filed that information away under potential threat and refocused on immediate concerns. He'd crashed into this reality through what his fragmentary memories of the transit suggested was a dimensional rupture. Gentech's experimental bioweapon accelerator intersecting with something the Imperium called a warp storm. The energy signature had torn him from his world and deposited him here, light years from Earth, in a galaxy where his home planet might not even exist. No way home. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Which meant survival, adaptation, and understanding exactly what kind of war he'd landed in. Mercer stood, adjusting the governor's ceremonial uniform with borrowed muscle memory, and approached the tactical display dominating one wall. Hive Tertius sprawled across the hololithic projection, a vertical city of 200 billion souls stacked in layers that descended miles into the planet's crust. The upper spires belonged to the nobility and administratum officials. The mid-levels housed factorums and worker hab blocks. The underhive was a lawless hell of gangs, mutants, and things that used to be human. Perfect camouflage. Perfect hunting ground. Perfect incubation chamber. His infiltration of the governor's position had been almost trivial. Malthus had been alone when Mercer found him, reviewing casualty reports in his private office. One tendril through the back of the skull, complete neural absorption, instant access to decades of memories, behavioral patterns, and command protocols. The impersonation was flawless. Mercer could replicate every mannerism, every speech pattern, every idiosyncratic gesture. But maintaining the disguise while expanding operations required careful planning. The Imperium's paranoia was justified. They had enemies everywhere. Chaos cults, Genestealer infiltrators, heretical cells. The security apparatus was vast and brutally efficient when properly motivated, which meant he needed to control the narrative. Mercer activated the Vox network, patching into the Hive's emergency broadcast system. When he spoke, it was with Malthus's voice, calm, authoritative, paternal. Citizens of Tertius, this is your governor. The recent industrial accident in Sector 77 has been contained. Casualties were regrettable, but within acceptable parameters. However, preliminary investigations suggest possible cult activity in the affected zone. Effective immediately, Sector 77 and surrounding districts are under quarantine. Citizens are advised to report any unusual behavior to the Adeptus Arbites. The Emperor protects the faithful. A lie built on truth. The Imperium's citizens were conditioned to expect cult activity. It was omnipresent background radiation in a galaxy drowning in chaos corruption. By framing his arrival as a cult incident, Mercer gave the authorities an enemy they understood while buying time to spread and adapt. The real work happened in the aftermath. Over the next 72 hours, Mercer orchestrated a systematic infection of Hive Tertius's key infrastructure. He moved through the hive wearing a dozen different faces, a Medicae inspector examining quarantine victims, an Arbites investigator interviewing witnesses, a Munitorum logistics officer coordinating supply lines. Each identity gave him access to new populations, new biomass, new memories. He consumed strategically. A Vox operator here, a servitor technician there. Low-level functionaries who wouldn't be missed immediately, but whose positions gave him access to critical systems. With each absorption, his understanding of Imperial society deepened, and his infection spread. The Blacklight virus was elegantly simple in its original form. An aggressive pathogen that rewrote host DNA, creating either mindless infected or, rarely, evolved hunters with enhanced abilities. But Mercer had always been more than just the virus. He was the virus's apex form, the Omega strain, the evolutionary endpoint. He could control the infection's spread, modulate its effects, create specific mutations tailored to his needs. In the Underhive, where malnutrition and mutation were already endemic, he released a modified strain. Slow-acting, subtle. It enhanced strength and durability while maintaining host consciousness. The infected wouldn't even know they carried it until Mercer activated the hive mind connection. Within days, 3,000 underhivers had been exposed. Within a week, that number would triple. In the mid-levels, he was more cautious. He infected key personnel, Medicae staff, Arbites patrol officers, PDF coordinators, people whose positions gave them access to population centers. These weren't mindless drones. They retained full autonomy, operating as sleeper agents until needed. But he also learned the Imperium's defenses. The Ministorum priests who moved through the hive preaching the Imperial creed seemed to emanate something that made infected subjects uncomfortable. Not painful, but instinctively avoidant. Faith as biological deterrent. Mercer filed that away. Religion here has measurable effects. Investigate further. The Adeptus Arbites were more dangerous than their memories suggested. They weren't just police. They were judge, jury, and executioner rolled into power-armored enforcers with shotguns that could pulp a human torso. Their training included cult detection protocols, behavioral analysis, and zero-tolerance execution policies. And then there were the servitors. Mercer had consumed one early on. A loader servitor from a factorum, a lobotomized human with mechanical augmentations slaved to simple command protocols. The biological components had been mostly intact, but the mechanical implants had rejected his viral infection. The interface between flesh and machine created a barrier his virus couldn't easily cross. Cybernetics as infection vector denial. The Mechanicus may be immune. Adaptation required. But the most troubling discovery came from the memories of an administratum adept he'd absorbed in the governor's palace. Space Marines were coming. The Ultramarines chapter maintained a fortress monastery on the system's outer worlds. Standard protocol for suspected cult activity included Astartes response teams, genetically engineered transhuman warriors in power armor, each one worth 100 normal soldiers. The initial incident report from Sector 77 had already been flagged for their attention. Mercer stood in the governor's quarters, wearing Malthius's face, and considered his options. He'd faced superhuman opponents before. Evolved hunters, military special forces, even the prototype that had emerged from Green's research. But those had been biological opponents, subject to the same physical laws he'd mastered. Space Marines were different, post-human, genetically enhanced with something called gene seed, ancient biotechnology created by the God Emperor himself. Their bodies were armored fortresses. Their minds were conditioned beyond normal human psychology. Their faith was absolute. And if their genetic enhancements were as sophisticated as Malthius's memories suggested, they might be exactly what Mercer needed. He smiled with borrowed lips. Let them come. Every opponent was just another source of biomass. Every threat was an opportunity to evolve. The Imperium thought it was hunting him. They had no idea they were about to become his classroom. The Arbites Precinct Fortress in Sector 12 was a monument to paranoia-made architecture. 15-foot thick rockcrete walls, murder holes at every corner, automated turrets that tracked movement with machine precision. Inside, 300 Adeptus Arbites enforcers maintained order through overwhelming force and absolute conviction that the law was divine mandate. Judge Marshal Korvax reviewed the incident reports with a deepening scowl carved into his augmented jaw. 23 unexplained disappearances in Sector 7-7. 17 cases of aggressive behavior among previously docile workers. 9 instances of witnesses providing contradictory statements about the same events, including 3 cases where the same person was reported in 2 locations simultaneously. Classic cult infiltration patterns. But something felt wrong. The governor's quarantine response was unusually swift, said Interrogator Ven, her servo skull hovering near her shoulder, recording every word. Within 4 hours of initial incident, almost as if he knew what to look for. Korvax grunted. Malthius is a competent administrator. Paranoid, but that's a survival trait in the Administratum. Competent enough to classify 80% of witness testimony under seal? Competent enough to redirect 3 Medicae inspection teams before they could complete contamination protocols? Ven's augmetic eye clicked and whirred. I want to interview the governor personally. Denied. Korvax tapped the data slate. Planetary governance falls under Administratum jurisdiction. We enforce law. They manage politics. That's the division the Emperor established. Then let me investigate the quarantine zone directly. If there's cult activity, the Astartes are handling it. Korvax's tone made it clear the discussion was over. The Ultramarines respond within 6 days. Until then, we maintain perimeter security and prevent panic. Standard protocol. Ven wanted to argue. Her instincts, honed through 15 years of cult hunting in the Underhive Warrens, screamed that something was deeply wrong. But the Arbites weren't investigation specialists. They were hammers, and hammers waited for orders. She didn't know that Judge Marshal Korvax had already been compromised. It had happened 3 days ago, during a routine patrol through the Underhive. Korvax's riot suppression team had been ambushed by what they assumed was a mutant strain. Feral humans with enhanced strength and disturbing coordination. The creatures had killed 4 enforcers before Korvax personally executed the pack leader with his bolt pistol. But one of them had gotten close. Close enough to touch him. Close enough for a single microscopic tendril to penetrate the gap between his helmet and gorget. To inject a carefully engineered viral payload into his bloodstream. Korvax had never felt the infection take root. The modified strain was passive, non-transformative, designed purely for observation and subtle influence. He remained himself, his thoughts, his memories, his convictions all intact. But when he considered certain courses of action, when he weighed certain decisions, he found himself choosing paths that happened to align with the infected's interests. Not mind control, something more elegant, strategic nudging. Mercer had learned from Manhattan. Direct confrontation led to nuclear response. But infiltration, subtle, patient, invisible. That was how you conquered a society too powerful to fight head-on. Through Korvax's eyes, Mercer watched interrogator Ven leave the command chamber. She was dangerous, perceptive, the kind of threat that needed to be neutralized before she uncovered the true scope of the infection. But killing her would draw attention. Better to redirect her. Ven, Korvax called out. She turned. Actually, there is something you can investigate. Reports of unsanctioned augmentation in the Factorum districts. Possible tech heresy. Take a team and look into it. A perfect misdirection. Tech heresy investigations took weeks of evidence gathering and Mechanicus consultation. By the time she finished, the Ultramarines would have arrived, drawn their conclusions, and departed. Ven saluted and left, her suspicions temporarily satisfied. Mercer released his influence on Korvax's thought patterns and withdrew his attention. The Judge Marshal would continue his duties, never knowing he'd been compromised, while Mercer focused on more pressing matters. The infection was spreading faster than anticipated. Through his distributed consciousness, a hive mind network connecting every infected host, Mercer monitored 47,000 compromised individuals across Hive Tertius. The majority were under-hive dregs, gangers, factory workers, the desperate and forgotten. But he'd also secured critical nodes in the infrastructure. Power grid technicians, water reclamation operators, a dozen Vox network administrators, and 17 Medicae personnel. The Imperium's size was both its strength and its weakness. With 200 billion people on this single hive world, individual identity meant nothing. Citizens were identification numbers, ration stamps, work quotas. Perfect anonymity for a shapeshifter who could wear any face. But the infection's spread had revealed something unexpected. Not everyone could be infected. Mercer had discovered this when attempting to compromise a missionary of the ecclesiarchy, a wandering preacher who ministered to the underhive faithful. The viral payload had entered the man's bloodstream successfully, but then stopped. Cellular rejection at a level that defied biological explanation. The man's faith had acted as an immune response, his absolute conviction in the God Emperor somehow creating a metaphysical barrier that the blacklight virus couldn't penetrate. Mercer had killed the preacher quietly, absorbing his memories to understand the phenomenon. What he'd learned was troubling. The warp was real. Faith had power in this universe. The Imperium's state religion wasn't just social control. It was an actual defense mechanism against supernatural threats. The God Emperor, enthroned in psychic agony for 10,000 years, generated what these people called the Astronomican, a psychic beacon that guided ships through the warp and somehow anchored human souls against demonic predation. From the preacher's memories, Mercer had glimpsed something he couldn't fully process. The warp itself, a roiling dimension of thought and emotion where human psychology became weaponized, where belief could literally reshape reality. And the infected, his infected, had no protection. The blacklight virus had stripped them of their souls. They registered as blanks in whatever psychic sense the Imperium used to measure these things, which meant two things. First, they were invisible to psychic detection, giving him a massive operational advantage. Second, They were completely vulnerable to direct warp-based attacks. Mercer had survived by adapting to every threat. In Manhattan, he'd evolved resistances to chemical weapons, thermal attacks, electrical discharge. Here, he'd need to evolve resistance to something that defied conventional biology: metaphysics. But first, he needed more data, more biomass, more understanding of exactly what he was dealing with, which brought him back to the Ultramarines. Through his network, Mercer had positioned infected observers near every landing pad and starport in Hive Tertius. When the Space Marines arrived, he'd know immediately. And when they deployed into the quarantine zone, he'd be ready. Not to fight them, not yet, to study them. The gene seed technology that created Space Marines was supposedly sacred, irreproducible, derived from the God Emperor's own genetic template. If Mercer could consume an Astartes, absorb their enhanced biology, decode their genetic modifications, he could evolve. In the governor's quarters, wearing Malthius's face, Mercer reviewed tactical data on Ultramarines' combat doctrine. They were strategists, believers in Guilliman's Codex Astartes, a comprehensive manual of warfare covering every conceivable scenario. They were disciplined, intelligent, and absolutely lethal. But they were also predictable. The Codex made them predictable, and predictability was weakness. Mercer's thoughts were interrupted by an urgent Vox transmission. One of his infected, a PDF officer stationed at Orbital Platform Sigma, reported an incoming vessel. Astartes strike cruiser Sword of Macragge requesting priority docking clearance. They were early, 3 days ahead of schedule, which meant they suspected something was wrong, which meant they were treating this as a potential serious threat rather than routine cult suppression. Mercer smiled. Good. Let them bring their best. Let them deploy with full tactical awareness and maximum force application. Every precaution they took would teach him more about how they thought, how they operated, how they fought. He opened a command channel to the infected network, his consciousness touching thousands of compromised minds simultaneously. Orders flowed through the hive mind. Withdraw to secondary positions. Conceal all obvious infections. Maintain civilian behavioral patterns. Allow the Ultramarines to investigate the initial incident site. Let them find exactly what they expected to find. A small cult outbreak, already contained, requiring standard purge protocols. And while they burned empty buildings and cleansed dead infection zones, the real spread would continue in the shadows. Mercer had learned something crucial in Manhattan. You couldn't beat the military by fighting their way. You beat them by making them fight the wrong war in the wrong place, while the real threat spread invisibly behind their lines. The Ultramarines were bringing the Emperor's finest warriors to purge a cult. They didn't realize they were walking into an evolutionary laboratory, and by the time they discovered the truth, they'd already lost. The Thunderhawk gunship descended through Tertius's polluted atmosphere like the wrath of a vengeful god. Brother Sergeant Agamemnon watched the hive city grow larger through the viewport, his enhanced vision picking out details that would be invisible to baseline humans. The upper spires gleamed with wealth and power. The mid-levels sprawled in industrial monotony. The underhive was darkness and decay. Standard Imperial architecture, function over form, brutality over beauty. Beside him, Brother Ptolemy checked his bolter's machine spirit with practiced reverence. Initial augur readings show no active warp corruption, Sergeant. Whatever this cult is, it's not chaos touched. Genus Stealer? Suggested Brother Castor, his heavy bolter maglocked to the deck. Possible. Agamemnon reviewed the tactical slate. The initial incident report was concerning. Massive biomass casualty, rapid infection pattern, witnesses reporting shape-shifting entities. Classic Genestealer cult behavior. But something about the timeline bothered him. The spread pattern is wrong, too controlled. Genestealer patriarchs are cunning, but they're not subtle. They spread through breeding cycles over generations. This outbreak appeared and then stopped. Bait? Ptolemy's tone was skeptical but alert. Or intelligence. Agamemnon stood as the Thunderhawk began final approach. Whatever this is, it's deliberately managing the Imperium's response. Stay sharp, brothers. The Emperor protects, but vigilance is our shield. The squad of 10 Ultramarines deployed in perfect formation, their blue ceramite armor reflecting the hive's artificial lights. Citizens scattered at their approach. Common citizens didn't look upon the Adeptus Astartes directly unless they wished to draw attention. Space Marines were angels of death, warriors of the Emperor, superhuman beyond comprehension. Their mere presence meant crisis. Governor Malthius waited at the landing pad's edge, flanked by PDF honor guard. He bowed deeply as Agamemnon approached. Lord Astartes, Hive Tertius is honored by your presence. I've prepared full briefing materials and take us to the initial incident site. Now. Agamemnon's voice rumbled like distant thunder. The Ultramarines didn't waste time on ceremony when civilians were at risk. Mercer, wearing Malthius's form, suppressed what would have been amusement. The Ultramarines' psychological profile matched their reputation. Direct, efficient, utterly committed to their duty. No small talk, no political maneuvering, just immediate action. Exactly as predicted. Of course, Lord. This way. He led them through the Hive's arterial transit ways, massive maglev corridors that connected the sectors. Civilians pressed themselves against walls as the Ultramarines passed, their transhuman bulk making even the wide corridors feel confined. Mercer used the journey to study them. Their armor wasn't just protective, it was integrated. Power systems running through every joint, neural interfaces connecting ceramite to flesh, machine spirits that responded to thought as much as touch. And beneath the armor, their biology was extraordinary. Through Malthius's eyes, Mercer couldn't see details, but the governor's memories provided context. Enhanced muscular structure, redundant organs, accelerated healing, neural augmentation, genetic conditioning that made them fearless. Gene seed, the Emperor's legacy, ancient biotechnology that transformed human boys into living weapons. Mercer wanted it. They reached Sector 7-7, 90 minutes after landing. The quarantine zone was exactly as Mercer had designed it. Scorched by promethium fires, scattered with evidence of violence, and utterly empty of living infected. The biomass crater at the impact site had been cleansed by Arbite's flamer teams days ago, leaving nothing but blackened rockcrete and ash. Brother Ptolemy deployed his auspex, sweeping the area with practiced efficiency. Biological residue detected, non-human protein chains, significant genetic drift from baseline human, possible Xenos origin, but he frowned. The patterns are inconsistent. Multiple different organisms represented in the same sample. Genestealer hybrids vary by generation, Agamemnon noted, moving through the ruins with bolter ready. 3rd and 4th generation can pass as human. 5th generation are purest strains. This isn't Tyranid derivative DNA, Sergeant. Ptolemy's augmetic eye whirred as he analyzed the data. It's adaptive, like the genetic structure is deliberately modular, designed to accept and integrate foreign biological material. That got Agamemnon's attention. He knelt by a scorched wall where Ptolemy had found samples, his armored fingers scraping up ash. His suit's autosenses analyzed the material, feeding data to his neurally linked cogitator. "This predates the Tyranid invasion fleets," he said slowly. "The genetic markers don't match any known Xenos classification. It's something else." Through Malthius's eyes, Mercer watched the Ultramarines work. They were methodical, professional, and worryingly competent. They'd identified the infection's artificial nature within minutes. If they kept investigating, they'd eventually realize the true scope of the threat. Time to redirect. "Lord Astartes," Mercer said carefully. "We captured one individual during the initial incident. A survivor, or perhaps a cultist. We're uncertain. He's being held in the Arbites detention facility. Perhaps he could provide answers." Agamemnon stood. "Show us." The detention facility was in Sector 12, a 20-minute transit through the hive's infrastructure. Mercer used the time to ensure everything was prepared. Through his hive-mind connection, he verified the prisoner was ready. One of his infected, programmed with specific responses and behaviors designed to reinforce the Genestealer cult theory. The prisoner was a middle-aged factory worker named Kellen, his body showing signs of physical abuse from interrogation. When the Ultramarines entered the cell, he cowered convincingly in the corner, whimpering prayers to the Emperor. Please. I didn't want to join them. They said the Star Children would save us. They said the four-armed Emperor was coming." Brother Ptolemy exchanged glances with Agamemnon. Star Children, four-armed Emperor, classic Genestealer cult terminology. "Where is the Patriarch?" Agamemnon demanded. "Where is the nest?" "Underhive, Sector 93. There's hundreds of them, maybe thousands. They're waiting for the ships to come." "Perfect." Sector 93 was abandoned Manufactorum territory, mostly collapsed ruins from a Factorum explosion decades ago. No civilians, no witnesses. Perfect killing ground, and perfect trap. Agamemnon turned to Malthius. "Seal the Underhive. Full quarantine. No one in or out until we've purged the infestation." "It shall be done, Lord." The Ultramarines prepared for war. They spent 3 hours gearing up, checking ammunition, blessing their weapons with sacred oils, reciting litanies of battle that dated back 10,000 years. Mercer watched through multiple sets of eyes. Malthius observing from command, infected PDF troopers monitoring from a distance, even an infected cleaning servitor in the Ultramarines' temporary armory. He noted everything. The ritual maintenance of their bolters. The way they distributed specialized ammunition, Kraken rounds for armor penetration, Hellfire rounds for organic targets. The chapter-specific combat doctrine that emphasized tactical flexibility and coordinated fire, and their absolute, unshakable faith. Before deploying, Brother Sergeant Agamemnon led his squad in prayer. "Emperor of mankind, guide our aim and steel our hearts. We are your angels of death. Through us, your will is made manifest. We shall know no fear, for you are with us always. We shall know no fear." The squad repeated in unison. Mercer felt something brush against his distributed consciousness. That same presence he detected when consuming faithful guardsmen. Not directed, not focused, just ambient. The weight of belief given form. He withdrew his attention slightly, keeping his infected assets passive and observant. Whatever that presence was, it hadn't noticed him yet. Better to keep it that way. The Ultramarines descended into the Underhive. Mercer had prepared Sector 93 carefully. He'd populated it with infected that had been deliberately modified to resemble Genestealer hybrids, chitin-like bone growths, extra limbs grown from consumed biomass, purple-hued skin achieved through specific pigmentation mutations. Not perfect mimicry, but close enough to pass inspection during combat. There were 300 of them, arranged in defensive patterns around a central nest. Actually, a carefully constructed stage set built from scavenged materials and organic matter. To Space Marine Auspex scans, it would read as a genestealer breeding chamber. A Gemin squad advanced with practiced precision, their armor's auto-senses piercing the Underhive's darkness. They encountered the first hybrids within minutes. Twisted things that shrieked and charged with improvised weapons. Bolter fire thundered through the ruins. Mass-reactive shells exploded inside bodies, shredding flesh and bone. The Ultramarines advanced in perfect formation, their centuries of training evident in every movement. They were economical, efficient, lethal, and they were being observed. Through dozens of hidden eyes, Mercer watched them fight. He noted their reaction times, superhuman but not precognitive. Their marksmanship, excellent but not infallible. Their tactics, disciplined but predictable. Most importantly, he watched how they moved, the weight distribution in their armor, the servo-assisted strength in their limbs. The way their enhanced physiology allowed them to fight at full combat efficiency for hours without fatigue. He studied every detail, cataloging weaknesses, analyzing vulnerabilities, mapping the gaps between armor plates where tendril penetration might be possible. The Ultramarines reached the nest and purged it with promethium flame, burning away Mercer's carefully constructed props. They executed every hybrid with ruthless efficiency. By standard Imperial metrics, the operation was a complete success. Cult identified, nest destroyed, threat neutralized. Brother Sergeant Agamemnon stood in the ashes and activated his Vox link. Governor Malthius, target eliminated. Recommend continued monitoring for secondary infestation sites, but primary threat is purged. The Emperor's blessing upon you, Lord. Mercer responded with Malthius's voice. Tertius is saved by your vigilance. The Ultramarines withdrew to their strike cruiser that same day, their duty completed. They never realized they'd been played, because while they'd been purging the fake nest in Sector 93, Mercer's real spread had continued unabated across 17 other sectors. The infection now numbered 73,000 compromised individuals. And more importantly, Mercer had learned exactly what he needed to know. Space Marines could be studied, analyzed, understood, which meant they could be hunted. The Ultramarines departed Tertius, believing they'd saved the Hive. In truth, they'd just given Mercer the information he needed to destroy them. The opportunity came 3 weeks later, in a sector the Ultramarines never even investigated. Brother Cassius of the Ultramarines' Second Company was a veteran of 2 centuries of warfare. He'd fought orcs on Armageddon, purged chaos cults on Ultramar's outer worlds, and stood shield wall against a Tyranid splinter fleet on Ichar therefore. He was a hero of the chapter, a warrior whose name was inscribed in the Fortress of Hera's Halls of Honor. He was also, at this moment, alone. The distress call had come from agri-world Prandium, a minor planet in the Tertius system that supplied food to the Hive worlds. Orc raiders, the initial reports claimed. A small warband, maybe 30 greenskins, attacking outlying settlements. Standard suppression operation, nothing that required a full squad deployment. Cassius had volunteered. A chance to bloody his blade between major campaigns, to remind himself why the Ultramarines fought. These people needed protection. He would provide it. The Thunderhawk dropped him at Settlement Gamma 7 at dawn. The place was eerily quiet. No signs of orc attack, no burned buildings, no looted stores, no corpses decorating crude totems. just silence. "Suspicious," Cassius muttered, his helmet's Vox system recording the observation. He activated his auspex, scanning for life signs. 347 human signatures, all stationary, all centralized in the settlement's primary hab complex. Gathered, waiting. Not orcs, never orcs. Cassius's hand went to his bolt pistol. "This is Brother Cassius of the Ultramarines to Settlement Gamma 7. Respond." Static. Then a voice, calm, measured, wrong. "Hello, Brother Cassius. We've been expecting you." The citizens emerged from the hab complex like puppets on strings. Men, women, children, hundreds of them, moving in perfect synchronization. Their eyes were empty, their expressions neutral. They formed a circle around the Space Marine, weapons hanging loosely at their sides. Genestealer cult, Cassius assessed immediately, his training taking over. First through third-generation hybrids attempting intimidation tactics. Ineffective. Not Genestealers, the voice corrected. It came from everywhere and nowhere. The citizens speaking in unison, their mouths moving in perfect coordination. Something better, something that evolves. Cassius opened fire. His bolt pistol barked, mass reactive shells punching through 3 citizens before they could react. But the others didn't scatter, didn't panic. They simply continued advancing, their movements fluid and unnaturally coordinated. And then they changed. Bones cracked and reformed, skin split to reveal hardened carapace underneath, arms elongated into blade-tipped weapons. What had been human civilians transformed into something else. Biomass constructs designed for a single purpose: killing Space Marines. Cassius had fought countless enemies. He recognized immediately that these things had been engineered specifically to counter Astartes' combat doctrine. They were fast enough to dodge bolter fire at close range. They were strong enough to grapple with enhanced physiology. And they were expendable. Mercer had 300 of them. The first wave hit Cassius like a tsunami of flesh and bone. Clawed limbs scraped against ceramite, seeking gaps in the armor. Acidic compounds, synthesized from absorbed industrial chemicals, sprayed across his helmet, obscuring vision. Weight and numbers dragged him down, overwhelming through sheer biomass. But Cassius was Ultramarines. He'd trained for exactly this scenario. Enemy swarm tactics, close quarters, overwhelming force. The Codex Astartes, Chapter 7, Verse 14. When outnumbered and surrounded, become the hammer that breaks the anvil. He activated his armor's integral flamer. Promethium erupted in a circular wave, immolating dozens of the creatures. The burning mass recoiled, giving him space to stand. His chainsword roared to life, its blessed teeth chewing through biomass with sacred fury. "For the Emperor!" Cassius bellowed, his voice amplified by his helmet's Vox speakers. He fought magnificently, every movement economical, every strike lethal, every decision tactically perfect. In 7 minutes of sustained combat, he killed 83 infected constructs. But there were still over 200, and Mercer was learning. Through the hive mind, Mercer analyzed every exchange. Cassius's combat patterns, his reaction times, the weak points in his armor where repeated impacts had micro-fractured the ceramite, the way his flamer had limited fuel capacity, the cooling requirements on his chainsword's power pack. And most importantly, Mercer learned about the gene seed itself. One of his infected managed to punch through a gap in Cassius's armor, a lucky strike between the gorget and chest plate that penetrated 3 inches into the Space Marine's shoulder. The infection lasted only seconds before Cassius's enhanced immune system purged it. But those seconds were enough. Genetic data flooded into Mercer's consciousness. He felt the gene seed structure. 19 additional organs implanted into a human host, each one a masterwork of genetic engineering. The secondary heart, the os modula that reinforced the skeleton, the biscopea that enhanced muscle growth, the preomnor that allowed consumption of normally toxic materials. Most importantly, the progenoid glands, 2 organs that stored and matured gene seed for implantation into the next generation of Space Marines. The source, the legacy, the continuation of the Emperor's genetic vision. Mercer wanted them. Cassius fought for another 3 minutes before his flamer ran dry. His chainsword lasted 2 minutes beyond that before its power cell depleted. His bolt pistol, held in reserve for emergencies, provided 30 more seconds of killing efficiency before the magazine emptied. Then it was just the Space Marine, his superhuman strength, and 300 infected, all working in perfect coordination. They brought him down through attrition. Pyle drove him into the ground with combined mass, held his limbs with sacrificial constructs while others worked to pry apart his armor. Cassius killed 17 more with his bare hands before they managed to immobilize him completely. "Your resistance is admirable," Mercer's voice echoed through the infected chorus, "but ultimately futile. You're going to teach me everything." "I will tell you nothing, Xenos filth," Cassius snarled. "You won't have to." A specialized tendril, thinner than human hair, sharper than a surgical scalpel, threaded through the gap in Cassius's armor. It penetrated skin, muscle, bone, reached the progenoid glands buried in his chest and throat, and consumed them. The genetic information was overwhelming. Mercer's distributed consciousness reeled as millennia of engineered evolution flooded his biomass. The gene seed wasn't just enhanced DNA. It was a complete rewrite of human biology, a transformation protocol that turned baseline humans into something approaching demigods. Every organ had purpose, every modification built upon the last. The process was elegant, sophisticated, refined across 10,000 years of warfare. Whoever had designed this god emperor they worshipped, had been a genetic engineer beyond anything Gentech could have dreamed. But the gene seed also had limitations. Rejection rates, compatibility requirements, specific activation sequences. It was powerful but inflexible, designed to produce warriors according to ancient templates rather than adapt to new threats. Mercer could improve it. He withdrew from Cassius's body, leaving the Space Marine alive but compromised. The infected pulled back, forming a ring around the fallen warrior. Cassius struggled to rise, but his enhanced physiology was failing. Without the progenoid glands, his body's regulatory systems were cascading into dysfunction. "You're dying," Mercer observed clinically. "The gene seed organs maintain each other in a delicate balance. Remove key components, and the system collapses. You have maybe 6 hours before total organ failure." Cassius laughed, a bitter, defiant sound. "Then I die having denied you victory. My gene seed will never create another traitor. The Emperor protects." "The Emperor isn't here." Mercer stepped forward, wearing the face of Settlement Gamma 7's magistrate, a middle-aged woman named Petra whom he'd consumed weeks ago. He knelt beside Cassius, studying the Space Marine with borrowed eyes. "But I can save you. I have your genetic template now. I can stabilize your biology, repair the damage. You'd be infected, yes. Part of me, yes. But alive, thinking, conscious. You could continue serving humanity, just under new management. I would rather die. I know. Mercer stood. That's what makes you Space Marines so dangerous and so valuable. He turned to leave, then paused. Your brothers will come looking for you. They'll find this settlement and assume orcs killed everyone. They'll never know the truth. Your sacrifice will be meaningless. My sacrifice is for the Emperor. Meaning is irrelevant. Mercer left Cassius to die. The Space Marines' faith was absolute. Infection impossible, corruption pointless. Some prey couldn't be turned, only harvested. But Cassius had already given Mercer everything he needed. Back in Hive Tertius, wearing Governor Malthius's form, Mercer retreated to a secure laboratory deep in the governor's palace. He'd had the facility constructed over the past 3 weeks, ostensibly for quarantine research, but actually for his own experimentation. The gene seed information was already integrating into his biomass. His body began to change, not mimicking Space Marine physiology, but adapting it. He didn't need all 19 organs. Many were redundant for his purposes, but certain elements were invaluable. The enhanced muscle density, the reinforced skeletal structure, the multi-lung system that allowed operation in hostile atmospheres, the neuroglottis that could identify toxins by taste. Most critically, the catalepsian node that allowed Space Marines to consciously process information while their bodies rested. Mercer's transformation took 6 hours. His borrowed form bulked with new muscle mass. His bones thickened and reinforced. His respiratory system grew additional capacity. When the process completed, he stood 7 feet tall. Not quite Space Marine scale, but far beyond baseline human. He tested his new strength by crushing a steel support beam with one hand. The metal crumpled like paper. But the physical enhancements were secondary. The real prize was the genetic template itself. With the gene seed mapped and understood, Mercer could create his own version, modified, improved, stripped of the Imperium's religious programming and compatibility limitations. He could create an army, not mindless infected, not simple constructs. True enhanced warriors, each one capable of standing against Space Marines, each one connected to his hive mind, each one disposable and replaceable, because Mercer could grow more from raw biomass. The Imperium's ultimate weapon turned against them. Mercer activated the Vox system, broadcasting to his distributed network across Hive Tertius. The infected numbered over 90,000 now, spread across every level of society. Enough biomass to begin production. Begin Phase 2, he commanded. Evolution starts now. In hidden chambers throughout the hive, infected began transforming, not into hybrids or constructs, but into something new. Something that combined Blacklight's adaptive evolution with the Emperor's genetic mastery. Mercer called them evolved Astartes. The first generation would be crude, imperfect, prone to instability. But each iteration would improve. Each generation would be stronger, faster, more refined. And unlike the Imperium's Space Marines, limited by ancient production methods and sacred rituals, Mercer could produce them by the hundreds. Brother Cassius died alone on Agriworld Prandium, his last thoughts prayers to the Emperor he'd served faithfully. His body was consumed entirely, leaving no trace, no evidence, no warning for his chapter. The Ultramarines would eventually notice his absence. They'd investigate. They'd find a settlement destroyed by orcs and assume their brother had died heroically in battle. They'd be wrong. Cassius hadn't died in battle. He'd died as a lesson, proof that even the Emperor's finest could be studied, analyzed, and surpassed. And his legacy would be a nightmare the Imperium couldn't burn away. Inquisitor Cryptman of the Ordo Xenos had spent 40 years hunting things that shouldn't exist. He'd tracked Genestealer patriarchs through 3 star systems. He'd dissected Tyranid bioforms to understand their adaptive evolution. He'd authorized exterminatus on 2 worlds to prevent Xenos contamination from spreading. He was paranoid, ruthless, and absolutely convinced that humanity's greatest threat came not from chaos, but from the galaxy's biological horrors. Which was why the reports from Hive Tertius made his augmetic eye twitch with suspicion. Ultramarines conducted standard purge operation. Genestealer cult eliminated. 0 Astartes casualties. Threat neutralized. Cryptman read the after-action report aloud to his staff in the inquisitorial cruiser Endless Vigilance. Does this sound like a typical Genestealer infestation to anyone? Interrogator Helmar checked his data slate. The timeline is compressed, my lord. Most cult infestations take decades to reach critical mass. This one appeared spread rapidly, then was eliminated within weeks. Exactly. Cryptman stood, his augmetic leg hissing hydraulically. Genestealers are patient. They infiltrate over generations. This pattern is wrong. And now, he gestured to the latest reports. Brother Cassius of the Ultramarines, missing. Last known location, Agri-World Prandium. Settlement found destroyed. Evidence suggests orc attack. Coincidence? Suggested his acolyte Yana. I don't believe in coincidence. Cryptman activated the hololithic display, showing the Tertius system in miniature. 2 incidents in the same system within a month. Both involving biological threats. Both resolved too cleanly. Something is hiding in plain sight. What do you propose, my lord? Full investigation. We go to Tertius personally, and we start by interviewing the governor who managed to contain a Genestealer outbreak faster than any recorded instance in Imperial history. The Endless Vigilance made warp translation to Tertius 3 days later. Mercer knew they were coming. His infected network included void station operators who'd reported the inquisitorial vessel's arrival. He had hours to prepare. The problem was that Inquisitors were specifically trained to detect infiltration. They used psychic interrogation, loyalty tests, behavioral analysis, and liberal application of torture to root out heresy. Governor Malthius's persona wouldn't survive close scrutiny. Mercer's impersonation was perfect on the surface. But an experienced Inquisitor would notice the subtle inconsistencies that marked compromised individuals, which meant Malthius had to die. Officially. Mercer orchestrated it carefully. Governor Malthius, suffering from increasing paranoia after the cult incident, had begun erratic behavior, canceling meetings, issuing contradictory orders, speaking to himself in empty rooms. His staff grew concerned. His advisors recommended rest. Then, tragically, the governor suffered a catastrophic stroke in his private quarters. Natural causes. The stress of leadership in the grim darkness of the 41st millennium claimed another faithful servant. A state funeral was arranged. The body, actually a biomass construct that would pass medical inspection, was cremated with full honors. Malthius's deputy, Administratum Adept Severus, assumed emergency governance. Adept Severus was also Mercer. By the time Inquisitor Cryptman arrived planetside, the previous governor was Ash, and the new one was eager to cooperate with any investigation. They met in the Administratum Palace's Grand Hall, beneath murals depicting the Emperor's Great Crusade. Cryptman was an imposing figure. Tall, gaunt, his left eye replaced with an augmetic that glowed with red targeting lasers. His servo skulls floated nearby, recording everything. Acting Governor Severus. Cryptman's voice was like grinding stone. I'm here to investigate the recent Xenos incursion. I'll need access to all quarantine records, witness testimonies, and biological samples. Of course, Lord Inquisitor. Mercer bowed with appropriate deference. Though I fear much was destroyed during the purge, the Ultramarines were thorough. Too thorough. Cryptman's augmetic eye focused on Mercer's face, analyzing micro-expressions, pupil dilation, perspiration levels. Tell me about Governor Malthius. Why did he handle the initial incident personally, rather than delegating to military command? The governor was, proactive, perhaps overly so. The stress of command affected his judgment in his final days. How convenient that he died before I could question him. Mercer kept his expression neutral. Convenient for whom, Lord Inquisitor? I assure you, his death was thoroughly investigated by the Adeptus Arbites. Natural causes. The Medicae reports are available for review. Cryptman studied him for a long moment, then turned away. I'll require a tour of the quarantine zone, and I want to interview the prisoner who provided intelligence about the cult's location. Ah. Mercer allowed appropriate hesitation. I regret to inform you that the prisoner died during interrogation. The Arbites were overzealous. Also convenient. Lord Inquisitor, if you suspect conspiracy, I welcome your investigation. Tertius has nothing to hide. That was technically true. Tertius had nothing to hide because Mercer had already scrubbed every piece of physical evidence. The quarantine zone was clean. The witnesses were either infected or dead. The biological samples had been destroyed. All that remained were official reports and testimony, and Mercer controlled both. But Cryptman hadn't survived 4 decades of Xenos hunting by trusting official reports. Over the next week, the Inquisitor conducted a methodical investigation. He interviewed survivors, all infected, all programmed with consistent cover stories. He examined the purged nest site, finding exactly what he expected to find from a Genestealer cult. He reviewed medical records, cross-referenced supply manifests, analyzed communication logs, and found nothing, which only made him more suspicious. Something is wrong, Cryptman told his staff on the 7th day. The evidence is too perfect. Every witness tells the same story. Every record confirms the official narrative. Real investigations have contradictions, inconsistencies, gaps. This is sanitized. Perhaps the Ultramarines' intervention was simply that effective, Interrogator Helmar suggested. No, Space Marines are warriors, not investigators. They purge threats, they don't sterilize evidence trails. Cryptman pulled up the biological analysis of samples recovered from the quarantine zone. Look at this. The genetic markers suggest Tyranid derivative DNA, but the mutation patterns are wrong. Genestealers implant genetic material that follows predictable evolutionary paths. This adapts, changes, almost as if it's responding to environmental pressures in real time. Adaptive evolution? Yana leaned forward. Like the Tyranid hive mind's directed mutations? Similar, but faster, more controlled. Cryptman's augmetic eye whirred. What if the Ultramarines didn't eliminate the threat? What if they eliminated a decoy while the real infection spread? Then where is it now? Cryptman stared at the data, his paranoia finally crystallizing into certainty. Everywhere, hidden in the population, and we're standing in the middle of it. He was right. But being right wasn't the same as being able to prove it. Mercer had anticipated Cryptman's suspicions. The Inquisitor was dangerous precisely because he didn't trust official narratives. But suspicion without evidence was just paranoia. And the Imperium's bureaucracy actively discouraged wild accusations against planetary governors without proof. Still, Cryptman was persistent. He began conducting random loyalty tests on Hive citizens, using psychic interrogation to detect heresy. This was a problem. Mercer's infected had no souls. The Blacklight virus had consumed that part of their humanity. Under psychic scrutiny, they'd register as blanks or worse. Mercer needed to redirect the Inquisitors' attention before he started testing too many people. The solution came from an unexpected source: chaos. Tertius, like all Hive worlds, had endemic chaos cult activity. Worship of the ruinous powers flourished in the Underhive, where desperation and suffering made people receptive to demonic promises. The Arbites conducted regular purges, but the cults always regrew like cancer. Mercer had largely ignored these cults. They were beneath his concern, too disorganized to threaten his operations. But now they became useful. Through his infected network, Mercer identified the largest chaos cult operating in Tertius's Underhive: the Children of Decay, worshippers of Nurgle who believed disease was blessing. They numbered around 3,000 cultists and had been operating for years without serious interference. Mercer anonymously provided their location to the Inquisition. Cryptman received the intelligence with interest. A chaos cult in Tertius's Underhive, extensive enough to pose sector-level threat. Exactly the kind of heresy the Ordo Hereticus should handle. But Xenos and Chaos threats sometimes overlapped. It could be a distraction, Interrogator Helmar warned, or it could be legitimate. Cryptman reviewed the provided intelligence, detailed cult locations, membership lists, ritual schedules. This information is too specific to be fabrication. Someone wants us to purge this cult. Why would anyone want that unless they're loyal? Or unless they're eliminating competition? Cryptman smiled grimly. But I don't care about their motives. If there's a chaos cult in this hive, we purge it. Assemble a strike team. The raid on the Children of Decay was brutal and efficient. Cryptman's team, supported by Tertius PDF and Arbit's units, descended into the Underhive and exterminated the cult in a single night. 3,000 cultists burned, their unholy symbols destroyed, their taint purged. It was a legitimate victory, a real threat eliminated, and it bought Mercer time. While Cryptman was occupied with the cult purge, Mercer accelerated his expansion. The evolved Astartes project was producing results. Crude prototypes at first, prone to instability and mental degradation. But each iteration improved. By the end of the second week, he'd successfully created 17 stable specimens, each possessing strength approaching genuine Space Marine capacity. They weren't perfect. They lacked true power armor, relying instead on biomass-generated carapace that mimicked ceramite's protective qualities. Their bolters were scavenged and modified, not sanctified. Their training was mental downloads rather than centuries of discipline. But they were his. Loyal, expendable, improvable. And most importantly, Cryptman had no idea they existed. The Inquisitor departed Tertius after 3 weeks, his suspicions unresolved, but his investigation stalled. He'd eliminated a chaos cult, verified the Genestealer purge was complete, and found no concrete evidence of ongoing Xenos activity. But his final report included a troubling notation. Recommend continued monitoring of Tertius system. Biological markers suggest unidentified Xenos presence. Classification, unknown. Threat level, indeterminate. The report was filed in the Inquisition's vast archives, one suspicious notation among millions. By the time anyone followed up on it, Mercer's infection had spread to 4 neighboring systems. The Imperium's own bureaucracy, its glacial response times, its endless paperwork, its institutional skepticism, had become Mercer's greatest ally. They couldn't respond to threats they didn't recognize, couldn't fight enemies they couldn't classify. And Mercer was very good at staying unclassified. In his hidden laboratory beneath the governor's palace, Mercer stood before a growth chamber containing his 18th evolved Astartes prototype. The creature floated in nutrient solution, its enhanced physiology maturing at accelerated rates. In another week, it would be combat ready. In a month, he'd have 100. In a year, thousands. The Imperium thought it had contained the threat. They'd eliminated a genestealer cult, purged a chaos infestation, and verified planetary security. They had no idea the real invasion had just begun. The void station designated Tertius Alpha was a sprawling orbital fortress, a city of steel and faith hanging in the silent black above the hive world. It served as the system's primary naval hub, resupply point, and first line of defense against invaders. Its population of 500,000 naval ratings, armsmen, and mechanicus adepts lived and died by the strict, unyielding codes of the Imperial Navy. It was also the perfect vector. Mercer, wearing the face and authority of Acting Governor Severus, arrived aboard the station for a routine diplomatic inspection. The station's commander, Lord Admiral Bastille, was a bloated, augmetic-laced veteran who regarded planetary governors as necessary annoyances. "Your visit is unexpected, Governor," Bastille rumbled, his voice filtered through a vox grill in his throat. "The station is on high alert following Inquisitor Kryptman's departure. We have heightened screening protocols." "Which is precisely why I'm here, Lord Admiral," Mercer replied smoothly, projecting an aura of weary concern. The Inquisitors' investigation, while thorough, has left the system's trade partners nervous. I must assure them that Tertius and its orbitals remain secure. A personal inspection will provide the necessary confidence. It was a flimsy pretext, but the Imperium ran on flimsy pretexts backed by authority. Bastille grunted acquiescence and assigned a junior officer as an escort. The tour began in the main docking bays, where warships of the battlefleet Obscurus underwent repairs and resupply. Mercer observed everything with a predator's patience. His goal wasn't just to infect the station, it was to infect the fleet. The Blacklight virus, enhanced with stolen gene seed knowledge, had evolved. Mercer could now engineer specialized strains. The one he carried today was designed for stealth and persistence. It would lie dormant in a host for weeks, only activating upon a specific psychic command, a frequency only he could broadcast. The infected would show no outward signs, passing even the most rigorous medical and psychic screening. The tour provided ample opportunity. In the crowded mess halls, a casual brush of shoulders. In the engineering decks, a handshake with a senior magos. In the barracks, a shared cup of recaf with off-duty armsmen. Each contact transferred a microscopic payload. By the end of the 12-hour tour, Mercer had seeded the virus into over 2,000 key personnel, including the commander of the station's defense batteries and the chief astropath. As his shuttle departed Tertius Alpha, Mercer sent the silent command. The infection settled into its hosts, dormant and undetectable. They were his now, a sleeper army in the heart of the Imperium's naval power. Back on Tertius, a new problem demanded his attention. The Adeptus Mechanicus had taken an interest. The message from Magos Explorator Vexilius was terse and direct, delivered via encrypted data stream to the governor's palace. It requested, in the polite but unrefusable language of the Mechanicus, all biological data recovered from the Xenos incursion. The Magos' particular field of study was adaptive xenobiology. The genetic samples the Ultramarines had provided him were, in his words, theologically disruptive. Mercer had anticipated this. The Mechanicus, for all its dogma, housed brilliant minds. Vexilius was one of them. He would not be misled by Genestealer cover stories for long. This required a different approach. Elimination was possible, but risky. The death of a Magos would trigger an investigation far more thorough than Cryptman's. Instead, Mercer decided on a proposition. A dangerous gamble, but one with a potentially massive payoff. He invited Vexilius to a private meeting, not in the palace, but in the secured laboratory beneath it. The Magos arrived with a retinue of 6 tech priests and 2 hulking battle servitors. Vexilius himself was more machine than man, his body a chrome-plated chassis with multiple mechadendrites writhing like metal snakes. A single human eye, magnified by a complex lens, stared out from a face of polished steel. "Acting Governor," Vexilius buzzed. "Your clandestine venue is noted. Explain." Mercer dropped the Severus persona. His form shimmered, biomass redistributing until he stood in his natural state, a figure of sculpted muscle and unsettling stillness. The tech priests raised their weapons. The servitors whirred into combat stances. Vexilius's eye widened, his mechadendrites clutching auspex scanners that chirped in frantic confusion. "I am the specimen you wish to study, Magos," Mercer said, his voice a flat, biological engine. "I am not Xenos. I am evolution." He offered a sample of his own biomass, a sliver of flesh that writhed on a steel tray. Vexilius, after a long, calculating silence, ordered his retinue to stand down. A mechadendrite snatched the sample and inserted it into an analysis port on his chassis. The data stream hit him like a psychic shock. Vexilius staggered, his mechanical body shuddering. Impossible. The genetic code. It reads as human, but the plasticity, the adaptive potential, it defies the Omnissiah's sacred biological templates. It improves them, Mercer countered. Your Imperium stagnates. Your technology is ritual, not innovation. Your gene seed is a relic, frozen in time. I have taken that relic and made it better. He gestured to a growth chamber where an evolved Astartes prototype stood in silent vigil. I can create warriors that surpass your Adeptus Astartes. I can heal any wound, cure any disease, adapt to any environment. I am the next step. Vexilius was trembling. A conflict of millennia of dogma warring with insatiable scientific curiosity playing out across his half-human face. This is tech heresy of the highest order. Abominable intelligence made flesh. Is it heresy, or is it progress? Mercer stepped closer, his voice dropping to a compelling whisper. The Omnissiah is the god of all machines, is he not? Is a biological machine not still a machine? I am a living, breathing STC, Magos. I contain infinite biological templates. I can give you knowledge your order has not possessed since the dark age of technology. He presented his offer. Not infection, partnership. The Mechanicus would provide him with secure facilities, raw materials, and protection from the Inquisition. In return, Mercer would give them access to his adaptive code, a biological revolution that could reshape the Imperium. It was a lie, of course. Mercer had no intention of sharing his core self. But the Mechanicus's hunger for lost knowledge was a lever he could pull. Vexilius was silent for a long time, the only sound the whirring of his internal processors. Finally, his eye focused on Mercer. A limited partnership, a research enclave on the dead world of Xylos outside Imperial jurisdiction. You will provide samples for study, We will provide discretion. The pact was sealed. Mercer had just neutralized one of his greatest threats and gained a powerful, if temporary, ally. The Mechanicus' obsession with knowledge had blinded them to the predator in their midst. As Vexilius and his retinue departed, Mercer received a simultaneous alert through his hive mind. The dormant infection on Tertius Alpha had reported contact. A Chaos warband, the Scourged, had emerged from the warp at the system's edge. They were making a direct course for the hive world, drawn by the same psychic null signature that had troubled Cryptmen. The warband was a ragtag collection of renegade warships, their hulls daubed with the marks of the ruinous powers. They believed the null signature indicated a powerful weapon, something that could be used against the Corpse Emperor. Mercer saw neither threat nor opportunity, but a test. He allowed the Chaos fleet to enter high orbit unchallenged. The void stations under his control did not fire. The PDF did not scramble. The people of Tertius looked to the sky and saw the twisted ships of the enemy and despaired. Then the boarding pods hit, hundreds of them, slamming into the upper spires like metallic rainfall. The Scourged poured out, heretics in scavenged power armor, mutants with grafted weapons, and bellowing cultists high on bloodlust. They expected to meet the staunch defense of the Imperial Guard. They did not expect to meet the Evolved. Mercer unleashed his first company of 17 prototypes. They met the Chaos assault in the grand concourse of the upper spire, a vast plaza of marble and stained glass. The battle was not war. It was a laboratory experiment. Mercer observed from a dozen different viewpoints as his creations engaged the heretics. The Evolved fought with a terrifying, silent efficiency. Their biomass blades sheared through power armor. They moved with a speed that defied their bulk, adapting to the chaotic, unpredictable fighting style of the enemy in real time. A Chaos Space Marine, a hulking berserker of Khorne, charged one of the Evolved, his chain axe roaring. The Evolved took the blow on a hardened carapace shield that grew instantly from its arm. The chain axe bit deep, spraying black blood, but the Evolved did not falter. Its other arm transformed into a whip-like tendril that wrapped around the berserker's helmet, yanking his head forward as a blade fist punched through his chest plate and consumed his primary heart. Mercer felt the rush of new genetic data, the corrupting touch of chaos on human biology, the warping power of the warp. It was chaotic, unstable, but powerful. He began to adapt, his own biomass subtly shifting to incorporate useful mutations, a resistance to empirical corruption, an ability to sense warp energies. The Chaos assault faltered. The Scourged, who had expected easy plunder, were being systematically dismantled. Their leader, a sorcerer chanting baleful incantations, hurled a bolt of warp fire at an Evolved. The creature was consumed in unnatural flames, but as it died, Mercer learned. He felt how the warp energy interacted with biological matter, how faith and emotion could unmake physical law. He would need to evolve a defense, something that could shield his kind from the Immaterium. Within an hour, the Chaos boarding action was annihilated. The survivors were hunted down and consumed. In orbit, Mercer, through his infected agents, ordered the station's defense lasers to fire. The Scourged fleet, caught by surprise, was vaporized. To the citizens of Tertius, it was a miracle. The new governor's mysterious warriors had saved them. Faith in the Imperium was restored. To Mercer, it was a successful field test. The Evolved were viable, and he had gained invaluable data on combating the warp. But the battle had a witness. Aboard the Endless Vigilance, which had been monitoring the system from a hidden position in the asteroid belt, Inquisitor Cryptmen watched the sensor logs in horror. he saw the governor's personal bodyguards, things that were neither Astartes nor Abhuman, butcher the Chaos warband with impossible biology. He saw the void stations hold their fire until the perfect moment. He saw a coordination that was too perfect, too precise. The report from Tertius Alpha was the final piece. A junior armsman, one of the few uninfected, had witnessed a senior officer's eyes glow with a faint black light for a single second during the battle. A phenomenon mentioned in no Imperial record, but one that matched the description of a long-lost Xenos threat from the dark age of technology. Cryptman finally had his classification. He opened a direct, encrypted channel to the Ordo Xenos High Command on Terra, his voice grim with apocalyptic certainty. "This is Inquisitor Cryptman. Tertius system is compromised. The threat is not Tyranid. It is not Chaos. It is the Blacklight. I repeat, we have a confirmed Blacklight outbreak. Requesting immediate exterminatus authority. The Emperor protects." The message was sent. The slow, grinding wheels of the Inquisition began to turn. Mercer, sensing the sudden, focused dread emanating from the few uninfected minds in his network, knew the game had changed. The Imperium was finally taking him seriously. It was about time. The word arrived not through official channels, but through the shivering of the hive mind. A psychic shockwave, a tremor of pure, undiluted dread that resonated through every infected consciousness simultaneously. It was a sensation Mercer had never felt before. The collective, instinctive terror of trillions of souls across the galaxy, all focused on a single, terrible word. Exterminatus. The authority had been granted. Inquisitor Cryptman's evidence, sensor logs of the evolved, testimony of the uninfected armsman, and his own damning analysis had been deemed sufficient. The highest echelons of the Inquisition had spoken. Hive World Tertius and every soul upon it was sentenced to death. The instrument of this doom was already en route. The divine retribution, an inquisitorial battleship of the Oberon class. A vessel whose primary purpose was planetary annihilation. It carried cyclonic torpedoes and virus bombs, weapons designed not to conquer, but to erase. Mercer received the data from his infected agents within the Tertius system's astropathic choir. The choir's collective psychic scream as they sent and received the order had been a buffet of delicious, terrifying information. He now understood the scale of the response he had provoked. They were not sending an army. They were sending a reset button. He stood in the heart of his primary laboratory, the biomass around him pulsing in sync with his cold fury. 200 billion souls. 200 billion units of biomass, knowledge, and potential. A kingdom he had built, an army he was forging, all slated for atomic fire and viral dissolution. They thought they could burn him away. They thought, like the generals in Manhattan had thought, that enough fire could solve any biological problem. They were about to learn how much he had evolved. His consciousness expanded, touching every infected node on the planet. The network now numbered in the tens of millions, a hidden empire woven through the hive's infrastructure. The order was simple, a primal command that bypassed language. Converge. Protect the core. The hive city, already a monument to controlled chaos, erupted into a different kind of frenzy. It did not look like a rebellion. There were no chants, no banners, no coordinated assaults on the Arbite's fortresses. Instead, it was a silent, terrifying migration. From the upper spires, mid-level factorums, and deep underhive warrens, the infected moved. They abandoned their posts, their homes, their families. PDF troopers walked away from their wall stations, Factory workers stepped off assembly lines. Administratum adepts left their data slates mid-sentence. They moved with a single-minded purpose, flowing through the arteries of the hive, like leukocytes rushing to a wound. The uninfected watched in confusion and mounting horror. Preachers declared it a mass heresy, a mass possession. Arbeits units opened fire on the marching columns, cutting down hundreds, then thousands. It made no difference. The silent marchers did not fight back, did not scream. They simply walked through the gunfire, the dead and wounded being absorbed by the living. The column continuing its implacable march toward the central administrative spire, Mercer's fortress. The spire became the heart of a new, living organism. The converging infected piled into the surrounding structures, their bodies merging. They did not form a mob. They formed architecture. A wall of flesh and bone began to rise around the governor's palace, a grotesque barricade that thickened by the hour, woven with hardened chitinous plates and pulsing with black veins. Towers of fused bodies, their limbs interlocked, reached towards the smog-choked sky, forming a defensive canopy. It was a fortress of meat and resolve, a bastion built from the very people the Imperium sought to save by destroying. Meanwhile, in the void, Mercer's plan entered its final phase. The divine retribution translated from the warp at the system's edge, a sleek dagger of polished adamantine and wrath. Its commander, Inquisitor Lord Valerius, immediately detected the anomalous biological readings from Tertius. The Xenos organism has revealed its true nature, Valerius declared from his command throne. It consolidates its biomass, a predictable if monstrous survival instinct. It changes nothing. All batteries target the central spire. Launch cyclonic torpedo sequence Alpha. Aboard the orbiting fortress of Tertius Alpha, the infection stirred. The 2,000 dormant agents, including the chief astropath and the defense battery commander, received their final command. The station's powerful void shields, which should have been raised against external threats, flickered and died. The massive defense lasers, designed to protect the station and the planet below, swiveled on their axis. Not toward the Chaos fleet that was already dust, but toward the divine retribution. Lord Valerius had time for a single moment of stunned disbelief. The station, it's turning on us. How? The first lance beam from Tertius Alpha sheared through the divine retribution's void shields, which had been oriented to defend against planetary fire. The beam carved a glowing canyon across the battleship's hull, vaporizing armor plate and exploding secondary reactors. Alarms shrieked across the inquisitorial vessel. "Return fire! Destroy that station!" Valerius roared. The ensuing void battle was short, brutal, and utterly chaotic. The divine retribution, wounded and caught off guard, unleashed its fury on Tertius Alpha. Macro cannon shells the size of hab blocks punched into the station, detonating internal magazines and tearing the orbital city apart. But the infected crew fought back with the station's remaining weapons, their coordination perfect, their aim unnervingly precise. They targeted engines and weapon batteries, aiming to cripple, not kill. They were buying time. As the two Imperial assets tore each other apart in high orbit, a single, unarmed bulk lander, designated the Emperor's Bounty, detached from the dying station. It was packed with 500 of the most advanced evolved, their biomass compressed into humanoid form, their minds silent and ready. It began a desperate, high-G burn towards the divine retribution. The inquisitorial ship's point defense systems, overwhelmed by debris and the station's final, suicidal volley, only managed to clip the lander's engines. It spun out of control, a burning meteor, and slammed into the battleship's primary launch bay. The impact doors sealed, containing the breach. But it was too late. The Evolved were aboard. What followed was an extermination in reverse. The Evolved burst from the wrecked lander, their forms shifting from humanoid shapes into a whirlwind of blades, claws, and whip fists. They moved through the ship's corridors like a tide, a silent, adaptive plague. The Divine Retribution's crew, well-trained naval ratings, and zealous inquisitorial stormtroopers were utterly outmatched. Their lasguns and shotguns were ineffective against biomass that regenerated faster than they could inflict damage. Their flamers were met with creatures that had evolved heat-resistant carapaces. Their choke point defenses were bypassed by Evolved that dissolved into swarms of smaller organisms to seep through ventilation shafts. Mercer experienced it all through 1,000 different eyes. He felt the moment his children breached the bridge, cutting down the last of the stormtrooper guard. He saw through the eyes of an Evolved Inquisitor Lord Valerius standing before his command throne, a plasma pistol in his hand, his face a mask of defiant fury. "You will not have this ship, Xenos filth," Valerius screamed, firing. The plasma bolt vaporized one of the Evolved, but 2 more took its place. They did not kill him immediately. They immobilized him, tendrils of biomass pinning his arms and legs. Then, the largest of the Evolved approached, its form shifting, features rearranging, until it wore the face of Acting Governor Severus. "The ship is already mine," Mercer's voice echoed in the enclosed space. "Your body, your knowledge, your authority, they are just delayed acquisitions." Valerius spat, the globules sizzling on the creature's chitinous chest. "The Emperor will prevail. He isn't here." The consumption was swift. Mercer, directing the action from planet side, absorbed Valerius's memories, his access codes, his understanding of inquisitorial protocol. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place. With Valerius's authority, Mercer broadcast a fleet-wide signal from the Divine Retribution. "This is Inquisitor Lord Valerius aboard the Divine Retribution. The Xenos threat on Tertius has been reassessed. New evidence suggests the planetary population can be salvaged. The black light entity has been contained within the central spire. Stand down, the Exterminatus. Repeat, stand down. All naval assets are to assume holding pattern and await further instructions." The message, authenticated with Valerius's own personal ciphers, created confusion and then reluctant acceptance across the fleet. The guns fell silent. In the smoldering ruins of Tertius Alpha and the blood-drenched corridors of the Divine Retribution, the infected began the work of repair and assimilation. Ship crews were quietly consumed and replaced. Damage was patched not with steel, but with living, regenerating biomass. Mercer stood atop his fleshy fortress on Tertius, looking up at the stars. He had not just survived the Imperium's ultimate sanction, he had hijacked it. He now controlled an inquisitorial battleship, its crew, and the narrative. The broadcast was a lie, of course, a temporary measure. But it gave him the one thing he needed most: time. Time to spread. Time to evolve further. Time to turn the Imperium's own weapons against it. The message from the Divine Retribution was not a surrender. It was a declaration of war, delivered from the very heart of Imperial authority. The Imperium had tried to burn him, and in doing so, had handed him the match. Control was an illusion the Imperium wore like ceremonial robes. Mercer saw it now with crystalline clarity, his consciousness distributed across a stolen battleship, a dead void station, and a planet transforming into a single biological entity. The Imperium's power was a vast, intricate machine. but its gears were rusted shut by dogma and its operators were blind. By becoming one of the operators, he could seize the controls. The First Order broadcast from the Divine Retribution, now under the command of an evolved wearing Valerius's face, was a recall. All system patrol ships, the handful of frigates and destroyers that had survived the initial confusion, were ordered to dock with the battleship for debriefing and purification rites. One by one, they entered the primary launch bay. None left. Their crews were absorbed. Their ships added to Mercer's nascent, silent fleet. The Second Order was a summons. Using Valerius's authority and the terrified memories of the consumed astropaths, Mercer sent a priority astropathic message to the Ordo Xenos fortress on the neighboring world of Viridia. It reported a contained but volatile blacklight outbreak on Tertius and requested immediate Mechanicus support for analysis and containment, specifically naming Magos Vexilius. It was a trap baited with the one thing the Mechanicus could not resist: unique data. While the Imperium's wheels turned, Mercer focused inward on the great work. Hive Tertius was no longer a city. It was a gestation sac. The convergent biomass of millions of infected was not merely a defensive wall, it was raw material. Deep within the fortified spire, the laboratory had been absorbed, becoming a pulsating, organic chamber. Here, Mercer directed the creation of his magnum opus. He called it the Nexus. It was not a creature, not a building, but an organ, a central processing node for his distributed consciousness. Woven from the most refined gene seed-enhanced biomass and the cerebral tissue of thousands of psychers consumed over the months. The Nexus amplified his hive mind, allowing him to coordinate across interstellar distances without the unreliable medium of the warp. It was the key to true, galactic-scale infection. As he worked, the Mechanicus answered the summons. The Cogitant Verity, Vexilius's exploratory vessel, translated into the system and docked with the Divine Retribution. The Magos, surrounded by his tech priest retinue, was all efficiency and curiosity, his mechadendrites twitching with anticipation. The evolved Valerius greeted him on the battleship's command deck. Magos, the situation is precarious. The blacklight biomass is contained but exhibits fascinating adaptive properties. Your expertise is required. Vexilius's single human eye scanned the command deck. His augers detected the faint, wrong biological readings, the subtle synchronized movements of the crew. His logic centers screamed a warning, but his curiosity centers overrode them. The chance to study the specimen up close, to acquire its secrets for Mars, was too compelling. "Take me to the primary sample," Vexilius buzzed. "Of course," the evolved replied. "It is in the primary hangar bay." The doors to the command deck sealed shut. The moment they hissed closed, the crew on the bridge stilled. Then, as one, they turned to face the Mechanicus delegation, their eyes glowing with soft, black light. Vexilius had time to utter a single, binary curse before they were upon them. His battle servitors opened fire, their heavy bolters chewing through ceramite and flesh. But the evolved were faster, their bodies flowing around the shots. Tech priests were dragged down, their mechanical components shrieking as biomass tendrils sought the weak points where flesh met metal. Vexilius fought with the terrifying strength of his augmented body, crushing an evolved skull with a powered mechadendrite. But a whip fist wrapped around his leg, pulling him off balance. He saw the evolved Valerius standing over him, its features melting back into Mercer's natural state. "The partnership is concluded," Mercer said. "Your usefulness as an independent entity is at an end. Your knowledge, however, is not." Vexilius's final sight was of Mercer's hand, fingers elongating into needle-sharp probes, descending towards his cranium. The consumption of Magos Vexilius was a data apocalypse. Mercer absorbed not just the man's memories, but centuries of accumulated Mechanicus lore. Starship engineering, plasma reactor mechanics, the sacred rituals that appeased machine spirits, and most critically, the principles of warp drive technology and the Geller field. He understood now how the Imperium traveled the stars, by tearing a hole into a hellish dimension of thought and emotion and using a bubble of reality to survive the transit. The Geller field was the key. A failure meant demonic incursion and a fate worse than death. And Mercer knew how to make them fail. With Vexilius's knowledge integrated, Mercer's evolution leapt forward. The nexus beneath Tertius pulsed, and a new command was woven into the genetic code of every infected cell. The Geller disruption sequence. It was a psychic virus, a specific, low-level harmonic broadcast on the empiric wavelength that resonated with the Geller field stabilization matrix. It wouldn't shut the field down. That would be detected instantly. Instead, it would induce a slow, progressive degeneration, a creeping instability that would be attributed to normal warp turbulence or machine spirit agitation. By the time the crew realized their protection was failing, it would be too late. The demons would already be inside. The first test subject was the Cogitant Verity. With its crew and Magos absorbed, Mercer sent it back into the warp. Its new infected crew programmed to set a course for a densely populated Imperial system and activate the disruption sequence en route. It was a seed pod, carrying a different kind of infection into the Imperium's veins. His work was interrupted by a new alert. The Imperium was not as blind as he had hoped. The long-range augurs of the divine retribution, now part of his own nervous system, detected a new warp translation. Not a single ship, but a fleet. And not just any fleet. The Ultramarines. The entire second company, led by Captain Agamemnon himself, aboard the battle barge Valen's Revenge. And they were not alone. They were accompanied by 2 ships of the Ordo Malleus, the Demon Hunters. They had not believed Valerius's stand-down order. They had come to finish the job. Agamemnon's voice boomed across the Vox, bypassing the stolen Valerius identity entirely. Xenos entity, your deception is known. Your corruption ends today. Surrender the divine retribution and submit to purification, or be destroyed. Mercer stood on the bridge of his stolen flagship, watching the powerful fleet deploy. This was not an Inquisitor with a single battleship. This was the full, focused might of the Imperium's finest. He had the divine retribution and a handful of captured frigates. A direct fight was suicide, so he would not fight directly. He gave a single, silent order. Aboard the Valen's Revenge, the chief astropath, a wizened man named Corvus, suddenly screamed and clawed at his face. For weeks, he had been receiving the faint, psychic null signals from Tertius. A nagging headache he attributed to the strain of command. He had no idea that Mercer, through the growing power of the Nexus, had learned to piggyback a microscopic viral payload on that very signal. The Geller disruption sequence activated inside his mind. On the bridge, Captain Agamemnon saw the astropath convulse and die, black veins crawling across his skin. A moment later, the battle barge's Geller field fluctuated. The alarm had just begun to blare when the warp tore its way in. Reality peeled back like rotting fruit. The air grew cold and thick with the smell of blood and incense. One of the junior officers on the bridge began to laugh, his jaw unhinging as a blue, multi-limbed horror poured out of his mouth. The view screen flickered, showing not the void of space, but a labyrinth of impossible geometry and screaming faces. The Valen's Revenge was lost in seconds, a playground for demons, The other Ultramarine ships, seeing their flagship consumed by warp energies, broke formation in shock. The two Ordo Malleus ships, recognizing the signs of a Geller field collapse, immediately began warding rituals, their Grey Knights preparing to board their own sister ship to purge the infestation. In the confusion, Mercer acted. The Divine Retribution and its captured frigates opened fire, not on the Space Marines, but on the Ordo Malleus ships. Lance beams and macro cannon shells hammered their void shields, which were already straining to contain the empiric backlash from the dying battle barge. It was a short, brutal engagement. Isolated and caught between a demonic incursion and Mercer's focused fire, the Demon Hunter's ships were torn apart. The remaining Ultramarines' vessels, leaderless and facing an enemy that could somehow break the one law that made space travel possible, made the only logical choice. They retreated, warping out of the system to warn the Imperium of the new, terrifying nature of the threat. Mercer watched them go. He had won. He had shattered a fleet of the Imperium's best with a single targeted strike. He had turned their greatest vulnerability, their reliance on the warp, into his sharpest weapon. The nexus on Tertius pulsed with triumph. The path was clear. He would not need to conquer the Imperium world by world. He just needed to send infected ships into the warp, carrying the disruption sequence like a plague. He would make the Imperium afraid of the dark between the stars. He would make every voyage a potential death sentence. He would strangle their empire without ever facing their armies. The Imperium had tried to exterminate him. In response, he would infest their very soul. The war was over. The corruption had begun. Silence. Not the absence of sound, but a new kind of quiet, thick and purposeful that fell over the Tertius system. The last echoes of macro cannon fire faded. The psychic screams from the devoured battle barge were swallowed by the void. The only thing moving was the slow, biological tide on the surface of Tertius. The hive city completing its transformation into a single, continent-sized organism. Mercer stood at the heart of it, within the Nexus. The chamber was no longer a room, but a vast, pulsating cavern of living tissue, threaded with glowing neural pathways and vascular systems that pumped black, nutrient-rich ichor. Here, he was not a man, or a virus, or a monster. He was the system itself. His consciousness was the planet, the ships in orbit, the millions of infected minds moving in perfect, silent harmony. Victory was not a moment of triumph, but a state of being. He had not just defeated the Imperium's response, he had fundamentally broken their understanding of warfare. The Geller disruption sequence was more than a weapon. It was a paradigm shift. He had spent his existence adapting to threats, but now he had become the threat to which the Imperium would have to adapt. The Hunter had become the habitat. His first act was one of perfect, logical consolidation. The remaining infected biomass on Tertius, the millions who had formed the defensive fortress, began to dissolve. They did not die. They were reabsorbed, their mass and memories flowing back into the planetary gestalt, their component parts broken down for more efficient use. The great fleshy spires retracted, the barricades of bone and sinew melted away, until only the original, skeletal structure of Hive Tertius remained. A hollow metallic shell draped with a thin, breathing film of biomass. From orbit, it would look dead. A tomb. Only the most sensitive auspex would detect the low, powerful thrum of life hidden within. A heartbeat waiting to be transplanted across the stars. His fleet was his seed. The Divine Retribution and the handful of captured frigates hung in the void, their hulls already being modified. Tendrils of organic matter, hard as adamantine, spread across their superstructures, reinforcing armor, integrating with weapon systems. These were no longer Imperial ships. They were living vessels, extensions of Mercer's will. They did not need crews, only direction. They were his apostles. He gave the command. One frigate, the Eternal Penance, shifted its course and powered up its warp drive. It did not carry bombs or soldiers. It carried the disruption sequence, coded into the very biomass of its structure. A psychic landmine waiting to be triggered in the empiric tides. Its destination was a random, heavily trafficked Imperial system. Its mission was to arrive, broadcast its corrosive signal for a single, catastrophic microsecond, and then self-destruct, leaving behind only a mystery. Another Geller field failure, another ship lost to the perils of the warp. The Imperium would see tragedy. Mercer saw sowing the seeds of systemic paranoia. This was his new strategy. Not invasion, but inoculation. He would inject the Imperium with doubt, with fear. He would make their own mode of travel a vector for his influence. Yet, as he watched the Eternal Penance vanish into the immaterium, a new signal brushed against the outer edges of his perception. It was not Imperial. It was not chaos. It was ancient, cold, inorganic. A pattern of data so complex and alien, it momentarily stalled his processing. It came from the dead world of Xylos, the site of his supposed partnership with the Mechanicus. Curiosity, a human vestige he had never shed, compelled him. He focused the nexus, directing a portion of his consciousness towards the source. What he found was not a Mechanicus enclave. Vexilius had lied. The facility on Xylos was far older, predating the Imperium by millennia, and it was active. A single, silent ship, shaped like a scythe and the color of tarnished silver, rested on the planet's surface. Its design was utterly alien, yet familiar from the classified memories of the highest-ranking individuals he had consumed. It was Necron, and it was scanning him. A data packet, compressed and encrypted with technology that dwarfed the Mechanicus's understanding, was transmitted directly towards the Nexus. It bypassed all his organic firewalls, not as an attack, but as a communique. It unpacked itself in his mind, a series of images, concepts, and cold, logical propositions. He saw the Necron Empire at its height, a race that had transcended the flesh, achieving a form of eternal, static perfection. He saw their war with the Old Ones, the creation of the warp-spawned races, the folly of biology. He saw their long slumber and their gradual, inexorable reawakening. The message was not a threat. It was an analysis. Query, identify. Analysis, entity designation, Blacklight, adaptive biological weapon. Origin, extragalactic anomalous. Assessment, threat level, minimal. Interest level, high. Observation, you represent the apex of fleshly evolution. A dead-end path. Proposition, cease hostilities against the Imperium of Man. They are a predictable, self-limiting variable. Your conflict accelerates their destruction, delaying the inevitable return of the Necrontyr. Stand aside. Your existence is tolerated. Interference is not. The communication ended. The Necron ship powered down, becoming one with the dead rock of Xylos once more. They had not come to fight him. They had come to dismiss him. For the first time since his arrival in this universe, Mercer felt something akin to insult. The Necrons saw him as a curiosity, a temporary anomaly in their grand, billion-year plan to reclaim the galaxy. They viewed his war with the Imperium as a minor distraction, a squabble between lesser beings. They had assessed him, classified him, and found him irrelevant. The Imperium feared him as a monster. Chaos saw him as a tool or a rival. The Necrons saw him as a bacterium. This changed everything. The Imperium was a decaying empire, its destruction a matter of time. But the Necrons, they were a true rival, a form of life that had rejected the very biological imperatives that defined him. They represented a challenge his adaptive nature could not immediately process. How did you consume something that had no flesh? How did you evolve to fight something that existed outside the cycle of life and death? The question was the most compelling he had ever faced. He stood in the Nexus, the silent, living heart of his new kingdom, and made his choice. The war with the Imperium was a means to an end. The acquisition of biomass, knowledge, and security. It was a stepping stone. The Necrons represented the next stage of his evolution. To surpass them, he would need to become something entirely new. Something that could bridge the chasm between the organic and the inorganic, between life and unlife. He would continue to strangle the Imperium, not for conquest, but for resources. Every world consumed would provide more biomass, more genetic data, more knowledge to be integrated. He would use the crumbling edifice of humanity as a ladder to reach a higher plane of existence. The galaxy thought in terms of empires and gods, of chaos and order. Mercer thought in terms of evolution. The Imperium was his prey. Chaos was a pathogen. The Necrons were his competition, and he had never lost a competition for survival. He turned his attention back to the star charts, his consciousness expanding through the Nexus. New targets were selected, not for their strategic value to the Imperium, but for their genetic diversity, their archaeological records, their potential to hold secrets about the ancient wars between flesh and metal. The divine retribution and its sister ships hummed with renewed purpose. The infection would spread, but its goal had shifted. It was no longer about destruction for its own sake. It was about preparing for the real war, the war for the future of existence itself. Alex Mercer did not destroy Warhammer 40k. To destroy something is to break it apart, to reduce it to nothing. What Mercer did was far more profound and far more terrifying. He became its new, dominant evolutionary pressure. He did not shatter the Imperium with legions of monsters. He unraveled it with a whisper in the warp, turning its greatest strength, the Astronomican guided warp travel that held its domains together, into its most critical vulnerability. He did not defeat the Chaos Gods. He rendered their cosmic struggle irrelevant by introducing a force that operated on a purely physical, biological axis, one largely immune to their corrupting influence. He did not conquer the Necrons. He earned their cold, calculating attention, marking himself as the one form of life in the galaxy that might truly be able to challenge their static perfection. The story of Alex Mercer in the 41st millennium is not one of a monster who laid waste to the setting, but of a new fundamental rule being written into its fabric. The Imperium, in its brutal, stagnant glory, was built to fight wars of faith and steel. It was not built to fight an enemy that learned, that adapted, that evolved in real time. Mercer was the embodiment of change in a universe that had declared change heresy. And in doing so, he exposed the fatal flaw in the Imperial truth. His legacy was not a graveyard of worlds, but a galaxy forever transformed. The Imperium would never travel the stars with the same confidence again. Every Geller field fluctuation would be met with cold dread. Every new biological anomaly would be treated as a potential outbreak. He forced the most rigid, dogmatic civilization in human history to become paranoid, agile, and adaptive, or die. In a bitter irony, the thing that might have saved the Imperium was the very thing it existed to destroy. Mercer, the ultimate consumer, had become the catalyst for the Imperium's own desperate evolution. And as his silent, biological empire spread, as his understanding of the universe grew to encompass the warp and the secrets of the Necrons, he stood on the threshold of becoming something the galaxy had never seen. Not a god, not a demon, but something perhaps more frightening, a living, thinking, evolving universal constant, a fact of existence as undeniable as gravity or entropy. The war for the galaxy was just beginning, and Alex Mercer was no longer a participant. He was the environment.